People always used to say to me, and I think I said over lunch yesterday, something like, people came to me all the time and they go, gee, I'm sorry I didn't meet him. Okay. So I don't know if that's so or not, because if he was around now giving the famous satsangs they give all over the world now, he would not have been popular. He was very, very direct. If you've read I Am That, you know that, particularly prior to consciousness, any of the books that are out on him. Very direct. He did not waste a word, and whatever concept, whatever idea, whatever you presented to him, he immediately deconstructed it. So there was good news and there was bad news hanging out with him. The good news was, of course, it was very liberating. The bad news was it was very painful. Because he attacked ferociously anything that stood in the way between you and that realization. One of his famous quotes was, I want to blast all of your concepts and put you in a no-concept state, or a no-state state. So as we go through this, and most of the day, I am sure this is going to rub up very strongly against some spiritual concepts that you might have, that you might not even know that you have. So, just as a warning, like I say, there's good news and bad news. The last thing he said to me, and I don't know if we'll see this in my segment, one of the things he said to me, I was in such pain that I really could not stand up for 2 years. So I don't want to leave you with the impression, which very often people are left, he wasn't a feel-good kind of person. He held the line, and you don't see that anymore. I know no one, in my experience, and I've been with at least 50 or 60 different gurus or teachers, who holds the line. In other words, it's very focused, it's very, very clear, it's very, very direct, and he doesn't waste a word. Okay. And he did not play any games. So just to illustrate even further, I lived in India for 6 years. I lived with Swami Muktananda for years. I had a relationship with Muktananda back in the early 70s, when it was a very, very small thing. And he was probably about 3 hours from Nisargadatta's place in Bombay. Rajneesh was probably about 4 to 5 hours, depending on how you got there. There were tens of thousands of people. I never saw more than a dozen people there, ever. It was a small little room. And what I should also say about this is that I didn't get involved in quotes, spirituality to serve God. What I got into spirituality for was one reason and one reason only, and that was I was in pain. And I was willing to do anything and confront anything, no matter what it was, to get out of that. So when I finally got to him, it was a huge relief, because I finally met somebody who I knew would not bullshit me. He didn't want money from me. He didn't care whether I stayed or whether I left. There was absolutely no game. When I came to see him, he looked at me one day and he said, do you know who you are? And I said, I feel a lot of love. I feel a lot of bliss. I said, I can even see energy patterns. And with a look of just disgust, he said, I'm not interested if you're satisfied or pacified with your spiritual life. Do you know who you are? And I was left in very much a quandary, which I'll go through that in here, and that is, he would make a statement here like, fluids come together and the I Am appears. Okay. This, to me, is fascinating because if you look at, there's a couple of books that came out. I wrote a book called I Am That I Am, which was a tribute to Nisargadatta. And then Walden 3, and then the Nirvana Sutras. Particularly in Walden 3 and the Nirvana Sutras, I talk about post-deconstruction. Post-deconstruction, if you're into philosophy at all, there's, in 1967, a man named Jacques Derrida, who just died actually in October, who's the founder of Postmodernism, passed away. Incredible Frenchman and a genius. He was absolutely incredible. But post-deconstruction is when you realize certain things. When certain things are understood, you don't have to deconstruct any longer. In other words, if you're into this style, what would happen is, it doesn't matter if I'm good, I'm bad, I'm high, I'm low, and whatever the stuff that comes, doesn't really matter. It's not you anyway. In fact, the awarer or the witness or the knower of all of that isn't you either. Now, what post-deconstruction attempts to do is to use contexts, to mix contexts such as science, or if you're familiar with quantum psychology, or neuroscience, brain research, the most recent brain research. It uses Buddhism, of course, it uses tantric yoga, to describe in language what Maharaj was trying to convey. Because when he makes a statement to me like fluids come together and the I am appears, obviously, what does that mean? What does it really mean? Maharaj's, one of his mantras was, all you can teach is understanding, and the rest comes on its own. But this is more than just a sutra, as I'll talk about. This lays the groundwork for the next probably 80-plus years of brain research. In this statement, and I went and studied it, this statement is the pivotal sutra of at least 1933, a book came out called Science and Sanity. It's like this thick, which I waded through. It took years to wade through. It basically describes the beginning phases of describing this. If you were in Germany right now, and the Germans are way ahead of us, not in spirituality, but in talking about in brain research and neuroscience. The research now, unquestionably, in fact, it's so unquestioned, it's not even discussable in Germany. It will land here in about 2 years. It's becoming mainstream in Germany, is you can forget the idea of volition, you can forget the idea of free will, you can forget the idea that you do anything. That is what Maharaj was giving me. It's becoming out only now, but again, it's a sutra it's actually quite remarkable. What I'm going to try to do is to describe why that is, which is giving you quite a bit of information. Now, Maharaj's thing was, and I think I quoted somewhere in here, my concepts, if absorbed, destroy all other concepts. So, for example, if we went backwards, and we just took the one substance, not two. That already, just in that statement, you are eliminating an incredible number of things. The first thing you're eliminating is choice. You're eliminating free will. You're eliminating anything like I create this or that. Why? If you imagine as everything one substance, not two, imagine everything is the ocean. And you are a droplet in the ocean. And as a droplet in the ocean, you think you're separate than the rest of the ocean. The ocean is going this way. Do you think that a droplet in the ocean could create or choose to go this way? It's going along for the ride. The illusion is, and Maharaj said, and you'll probably see me say it in here, he was screaming at me one day about it's all an illusion. And I want to get very specific about what does that mean, it's all an illusion. But if the ocean is all going this way, the illusion is that I chose to go there, or I created this, or I had the volition to do this. So one context is straight Advaita. Another context, which you'll see as we go along in this, is neuroscience. What neuroscience has shown without a question is that what you call I arises after the action and event has already occurred. In other words, the only reason you have an experience of I is because fluids in the brain, called neurotransmitters, come together. And when those fluids come together in a chemical reaction, you have an experience called I. That's all it is. This statement, if you just were to take, that's what was so the beauty of Nisargadatta was, if you just took that statement, you probably could burn most of your New Age bookstores, because they're not true. It's an illusion to believe that you chose this or that. In fact, most recently, as again my friends were in, they were saying the most recent research out of Germany is they would stimulate a part of someone's brain, and the person would laugh. And the scientists would say, well, why are you laughing? And the person would come up with a story. Oh, I'm laughing because you said this or that. It wasn't true. He's laughing because someone touched a part of his brain. The nervous system and brain actually create stories, abstracted stories, which are not true. Okay. They also would push a person's part of his brain and the hand would go up. And say, why'd your hand go up? They said, oh, I wanted to stretch my arm. No, you didn't. It had nothing to do with it. The fact is, as you'll see in this description, is that the brain and nervous system cannot absorb or process this material. The brain and nervous system receive an estimated, I believe, several billion bytes of information per second. It can only process and absorb about 2,000. That means what you see is only 0.0000. That's 0.00054% of what's there. All the emptiness is omitted. That's why the world seems solid to you. That happens automatically before you get there. So you can see when Maharaj, when he said it's all an illusion, Maharaj didn't mean, oh, spirituality is an illusion and this isn't. This is an illusion and this isn't. He meant all of it. Okay. So his thing was very, very confrontive in the sense of, in order to let go of something, you have to first know what it is. So his purpose was not in building a community or a spiritual lifestyle. It had nothing to do with that. In fact, the closest thing would be the Heart Sutra. If you understand the Heart Sutra in Buddhism, you understand Buddhism. If you don't, then you don't. It's just quite simple. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form, there's only one substance. Everything else doesn't really matter. It's a lifestyle, it's a community. It's nice. It doesn't really have anything to do with anything. In other words, the purpose of the nervous system, one of the purposes is to organize chaos. Now, Jacques Derrida, let me go a little further. Jacques Derrida said, his sutra was that the history of philosophy is the history of a search for a logos. A logos is an original source or cause that remains pure and undefiled. That is the history of philosophy. The fact is, it's not. It's an idea, it's a thought, it's an abstraction. In other words, if the I am did not arise, there would be no looking. Any experience you have is nervous system dependent. You cannot have an experience, even of the emptiness of the void, of Lord Shiva, or whatever it is, without a nervous system and brain producing an I. The I am comes first. Somebody went to Maharaj once, an Indian gentleman, and he went through this thing about he worships the mother, the Devi. In India they call it the goddess. And the Devi created me, and I worship the Devi, and so on. And Maharaj said, who came first, you or the goddess? He said, obviously the goddess created me. And I said, no, you had to be there first. First the I am must be there, and then all perceptions. So, for example, another sutra in India is a Sanskrit, is Drishti Shrishti Vada. It's a brilliant 3-word in Sanskrit. It means the world is only there as long as there's an I there to perceive it. That's it. Once the nervous system and brain produces once this happens, once these fluids come together, there is a world. When you die, you die. This body dies. The illusion is that the I is somehow separate, and so the I, as you'll see maybe in this if we go on, wants to go on forever. That's why it made all this stuff up. All these concepts, all these ideas. Now regarding choice, obviously, which we may not, I don't know if this is going to work much further because I might keep on going through the same reel on this. But one of the things I said in one recent workshop is, it would be like this. This is how it looks. If we slowed it down tremendously, it would look like this. I am now going to choose to raise my hand. Oh, see, I did it. I am now going to choose to put my hand down. Oh, I see, I did it. Everything you see has already occurred. Now, it didn't occur like last week. I mean, it occurred just prior to you seeing it. It all is there before you get there. Ego actually doesn't exist because ego is only a bunch of fluids coming together and you think that you are. That's all it really is. But if you want to say what sustains it is the idea of doership, authorship, like I did it. The action and event already occur, and then the I claims blame or praise afterwards. And that's it. there's this whole thing right now around teachers and students. And I really met at least 50 or 60 different teachers / gurus while I lived in India. In fact, Maharaj got on my case about it one day because I was staying in Ganeshpuri with Muktananda at the time, and there was probably the most sweet, beautiful yogi that I had ever met. Incredibly, like just walking love. Very, like right out of if they went to central casting in Hollywood and they said, find me a saint, this guy's going to fit. This is it. He's like Mother Teresa. I mean, he had an orphanage. He was just this incredibly, incredibly beautiful man. And he was in Bombay visiting, staying at someone's house. He didn't live in Bombay, he lived in the mountains. And so I left in the morning and I saw Maharaj. And then Maharaj usually had, about 8:30 in the morning. He'd do like a little chant, and then he'd do a little talk, then there'd be questions and answers. And then you split. It was over until maybe about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. You come back for about an hour and a half. And so I went and saw Maharaj, and I left Maharaj, and I went to saw this other guy named Baba Prakashananda, a really beautiful being. And then I looked at my watch. Just me and Prakashananda just sitting, hanging out all day. And then about, 4 o'clock or so, I say, see you later. And then I went off to see Maharaj. So I get there, and I walk in go up the stairs. You have to imagine, this is an attic. So you climbed up a stairway. It was almost vertical. It was like a ladder with like some wood behind it. And I climb up, and I walk. And the minute, my head just peeks in. And he's like, how many gurus do you have? And I didn't really know how to answer that. I'm like, well, I have about 16, And he said, don't wander about. He said, it's only entertainment for your mind. Just stay in one place. It'll all be revealed to you. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that I was like this model student. Oh, yeah, whatever you say goes. I was like, okay, that's a good idea, and I wonder who I'm going to see next week. Okay. About 4 years later, I went, okay, I don't need to do that anymore. But I had to kind of work it out and burn through that. But there's a thing about teachers, particularly nowadays, because so many teachers. To me, the onus is on the teacher. When I see the onus, the greater the responsibility, the greater the awareness, the greater the responsibility. Idris Shah, the noted Sufi master, in a book called Knowing How to Know, which is an excellent book. I'm going to paraphrase him tremendously. It was something like, when someone comes to see a teacher or guru, if they keep them there or give them a practice, and it's not right for them, then they are your enemy. Okay. I'm speaking very relativistically, obviously. But I was with so many teachers that kept people around for years. If you went back 1,000 years to Sufi land, and if there were 10 Sufi masters, we'll say in New Mexico, now there's probably 20, but then let's say there was 10. And you went to Sufi master number 1, and he'd look at you, he'd talk to you a little bit, and he'd go, I'm not really right for you, go to number 3. And if I went to if someone else went to number 10, he'd go, I'm not really right for you, go to number 1. They would send you where you needed to go. When I was a psychotherapist in practice, if someone needed some type of work that I wasn't doing, I would send them on their way. Okay? So that is student-centered. Teacher-centered is, I need you because I'm building an organization. Okay. So you, as a person, if you're seeing a teacher, the question is, you have to be your own barometer. And Maharaj used to say very clearly, if you've been around someone long enough and you feel more open and clear and liberated and so on and so on and so on, then you got the right person. And if you don't, then you don't. The problem that I faced, and I see people even now who are 20, 30 years into the game who faced, is rather than looking to see if it's a real fit, they blame themselves and they take on a mantra, yantra, tantra, belief structure of that particular system, and then they act it out. And then years later, they go, gee, why am I still suffering? Now, my favorite Ramana Maharshi story is it was about 1940s, I'm going to guess. And somebody came from Europe. Now, to get to Ramana's ashram, which is about 5 hours south of Madras in southeastern India, it's a drag now, so I can't even imagine what it would be like then, because you went overland. You didn't do by planes and so on. So this man was in incredible pain. He wanted to find out who he was. And so he gets finally, after these long, long trips, he finally gets to Ramana's ashram, he finally gets in front of the great master, and he says, please show me who I am. And Ramana says, go back the way you came. And Ramana's students, of course the story goes, actually got pissed off. How could you talk to this guy? This guy traveled all across of Europe, down to India, all the way here, and go back the way he came. He said, no, go back the way you came. Here's the abstraction. I hate myself. Abstraction, I am bad, I am good. Abstraction, molecules, chemicals, sensations, all the way back. Now, go back the way you came. The I came from nothing, subatomic particles, molecules, chemical reactions, sensations. I am bad or good or whatever. Go back the way you came. Okay. But again, what I'm going to try to give you is the guts of Buddhism. And let's put it this way. There's a very famous quote by Carl Jung. Carl Jung said, thank God I'm Carl Jung and I'm not a Jungian. I think if Jesus Christ was alive, I would feel free to say, thank God I'm Jesus Christ and not a Christian. Yeah. To compare Christ's teachings and compare that to Jimmy Swaggart. Okay, that is the correlation for me. It is very, very far removed. The real guts of Buddhism is the Heart Sutra. The rest is storyline. Whether it be, no matter what the process is, it's still storyline. Okay. Now, so form is emptiness, emptiness is form. There's one substance, there isn't two. Number one. Number two, intention. You, after the fact, go, I must have intended that, or I didn't intend that. And intention is a sensation, which is an abstracted representation of nothing. If you go back through the process neurologically, you'll have nothing. Then all of a sudden I appear and I go, I must have wanted it, I didn't want it, I needed it, I didn't need it, I created it, I didn't create it. You did nothing.
I'm not suggesting that there's an intender.
Yeah.
I'm suggesting there's an intention. I'm
after the fact.
There's a thinker.
Right.
I'm suggesting there's thinking.
Right. So let me give you another thing that might be helpful, or it might not be. Okay. We went through this whole phase right now, and actually, I'm giving you a 16-day training in 3 hours, or attempting to. Okay, so we did this in all of October. The perceiver of chemicals. Chemicals come together and the eye appears. Are there chemicals? No. There has to be a perceiver there to perceive them. Therefore, the chemicals, if a chemist looks like that and goes, there's an atom, an electron, chemicals come together, all that stuff is not two. It's a perceivable or a conceivable. The body is a perception. There are no atoms or electrons or neutrons or protons. There is no quantum physics. There is no neurology. There is none of this because all of them are perceiver dependent. In fact, the opening statement in the Nirvana Sutras was, in order for there to be a psychology or spirituality, there has to be an I. If there's no I, then why would you even need spirituality? If there's no I, why would you even need psychology? So all I'm going to suggest to you is one thing, that thoughts, I'm not saying there aren't thoughts. I mean, I'll be sitting there one day, I want a pizza, I want to go to the movies, I want to have a relationship, I don't want to have a relationship, or I want to get divorced, no, I want to stay married, I mean, whatever it is. Thoughts arise, thoughts subside. They're biochemical reactions. Chemicals come together and these thoughts occur. They're like farts. I'm being serious. It's just the body producing this stuff. That's all. There is no separate, I understand what you said, there's no intender, there's no thinker. Now, as far as manifesting, okay, this whole thing of creating reality, you create nothing. Absolutely and totally nothing. How could you? If everything is the same substance, and the illusion is that I am separate drop of water, separate from the rest of the ocean, how can I get the ocean to give me something? as if I'm separate. So one thing I feel extremely comfortable with is that most religions, if you cut it down and cut it down and break it down and break it down, you're dealing with one substance, not two. Most religions, particularly obviously Eastern religions, one substance, not two. If you get that, then you can obviously get that there's no I. But most people, of course, I mean, it's a difficult thing to get, but if you go, wow, there's only one substance, and how could I do anything? How could I choose something? The action and event arises after the fact. The ocean's going in this direction, whether I intend it or not, or it's not. Yes?
So, I have no trouble where you're going. So why are we all here? I mean,
Oh, great question.
why are we all here? Okay, so my question is simply, let me say I buy into where you go, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm left with the idea, well, so why am I here? Why are the trees here? Why are the rivers here? Why are the fish here? Why are we all here? If we buy what you just said, what do we do with the rest of our lives?
Okay. So, to answer your question, let's go into just straight Advaita and also Madhyamika Buddhism. I think he gives the greatest answer of all. And also, if you look at we're not going to have time to do this. This is a very long DVD. It's hours long. This question is asked, actually, to Nisargadatta. Now, Maharaj never studied a system. Maharaj never studied a form. He didn't sit and synthesize. He had whatever experience he had, and that's what he taught from. So there's a very important teaching in Madhyamika Buddhism, which is called the Eight Negations of Nagarjuna. It's 8 simple statements. Maharaj did the first one with me, and we actually have him on DVD doing one of the last ones. Okay. So there's no creation, there's no destruction. Obviously, if there's only one substance and not two, there can't be creation. Nothing can be created, nothing can be destroyed. So there's one substance, not two. What can be created and destroyed? Okay. There's no coming, there's no going. And I'll give you a further explanation on that one, because that's the one you're bringing up. There's no coming and there's no going. One substance, it would take something separate outside of that to say something is coming and something is going. There's no arising, there's no subsiding. Nothing arises and nothing subsides. How could it possibly? If there's one substance and not two, it takes two, a witness even, to go, there's a thought arises and subsides in space. If we're talking meditation. There is no differences, there's no similarities. Okay. So, nothing coming, no going, no differences, no similarities. Nothing's created, nothing's destroyed, nothing arises, nothing subsides. Nagarjuna was so radical, he said, there never was a Buddha who taught anything. It's a very radical statement, because what he's saying is if there's only one substance, how can there be a separate individual thing teaching something? Okay. So if you have a chance, unfortunately, it's actually, by the way, this DVD was supposed to be available in this, for this conference. It got caught up, obviously, in editing and so on and so on. But if you get a chance to look at this, there's a section of about 35 minutes at the very end of a question and answer session with Nisargadatta. I would highly recommend, it's subtitled, taking a chance, if you get a chance to take a look through it, because he answers this question as a gentleman who keeps on saying, well, why are we here? Why are we here? His question was like, in this bodily form. And Maharaj basically did, there's no coming and no going. What he said was, if there is only one something, everything is space. Everything is space, inside, outside, and so on. Where's the question of coming and going? If you're space, I'm space, inside space, outside space, it's all, he used the metaphor of, instead of water, he used space. If everything is space, and all there is space, and you're space, and I'm space, and this only space, what's the question of coming and going? Yeah. I can't. There's a woman in front of you, though. The evolution. Our Charles Darwin, maybe.
No, that was the evolution's brain. You're going to get to that, is it?
Okay, so
I have another question.
yes.
All right, so if in quantum physics, if we were vibrating in a higher energy where we weren't seeing anything at all, we would then be still nothing. Is that agreeable?
The question would be, without an eye there to perceive it, is there such a thing as energy?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, there is, or yeah, is that a good question?
Well, if we're vibrating at a higher level and we don't have that perception
Of energy.
seeing anything after the fact.
Right, this is perceiving with no perceiver.
Right.
Right.
So is that the state that you reached?
That I reached?
Yes, or the state to be reached?
I would say it the way, I would say that prior to the emergence of the I, just stay there. Prior to.
Well, when I say the I, I'm talking about the seeing.
These are about the seeing I.
When you were talking about how we don't see, it's our perception.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were energy vibrating at a higher level where we don't really exist as material in this form,
Right. Then,
is that the state of nothingness?
well, there is no, okay, let's start first. There isn't energy.
There is not energy.
Energy, location, let's take location, which is more difficult for people to deconstruct than energy, actually. Energy is an idea. Does energy exist without a perceiver of it?
Well, how does quantum theory explain it?
Exactly that way. Nothing exists without the perceiver. No perceiver. You got it?
I got it.
Yeah. But I want to be clear about this. When my friends from Germany came in, what they said was that, and again, it'll be here in a couple of years, it will not be accepted by most of the community because they're not going to be able to accept it. It will require a complete reorganization of everything. For example, when John Stuart Bell, and I talk about it in here, when you get into Bell's theorem, 1964, you would think the field of psychology would have realized that there's no cause and effect. That cause and effect is an illusion. And they would have reorganized itself in some way to go along. In other words, if we went back to whatever century, at first they thought that the sun and the solar system went around the earth. Remember that? You don't remember that, you weren't there, but you know what I'm talking about historically. And then all of a sudden, I think it was Galileo maybe, said, wait a second here, or Copernicus, said the sun is here and then the earth and everything goes around that. And the church, took Galileo away and they excommunicated him and kind of ruined his life. And so, because they had to rewrite, they had to reevaluate and rewrite, and they couldn't handle it. How does a system like psychology or spirituality, which deals with karma, the concept of karma and cause and effect, what happens when all of a sudden it's not true? Is there a reevaluation? Probably not. Slowly. Very, very slowly. Very slowly. You have a question?
How would this be applied to evolution, the history of evolution?
Mean like
What we were just talking about.
history, like amoebas and crawling on the earth. You mean dogs, humans, and all that other stuff. Again, everything is a perception. Everything you see and experience is an abstracted representation of something that is not there. The knower, experiencer, believer, aware, or witness is also part of that. The perceiver of the illusion is part of the illusion, because the perceiver only occurs through chemicals also. So whatever theory it is, it's going to obviously be only through perception. So therefore the question of, is it, as long as there's a perceiver there could be innumerable experiences. Innumerable. You can't even say how many there would be. Okay? So long as the perceiver is present, and Buddha said it in the Diamond Sutra. And by the way, I didn't know this until very recently. When he presented the Diamond Sutra, people ran away. There is no world. People didn't like that because they had set up monasteries and business and monastic society and, again, mantras, yantras, tantras, and a game structure. Okay? And so when you build content, what you're trying to do is, in this, what we were attempting to do was to show, I wanted to present a way that was almost irrefutable. In other words, I was saying to someone the other day, the sun is approximately, as I understand it, 96 million miles away. I mean, I might be off a little bit, but that's about what it is. From what I understand, if it were 98 million miles away or 94 million miles away, we'd either freeze or we'd burn to death because of the heat. Okay. Now, I can't refute that. I cannot refute that quantum physics works. Because you could not turn on your telephone. If I dial the telephone, it's always a miracle if you think about it. You dial the number, and I call somebody in Germany or something, and somehow it goes to some kind of computer up somewhere, who knows where, out there, and it comes down, and a guy answers the phone, who I just thought, it's kind of or you turn on your computer, or your bank. Your entire life is actually proved. In fact, in the United States, about 25% to 28%, I believe, your tax dollar goes to defense, i.e. atomic weapons in some form or other. Okay. So it controls everything. It's not you can't dispute it. And the idea behind post-deconstruction was to present a way of saying, it doesn't matter if your opinion is that the sun is 94 million miles away. I don't really care what your opinion is. I think we mostly agree on that. The rub is that in order to let go of something, you must know what it is. If I believe I can choose, if I can be something, do something, have something, create something, if I believe that I am that I am doing that, then I will suffer. So you're always working out of a model or a system. Maharaja's thing was always discard. In fact, there was a very famous Vipassana teacher who came to Maharaj, and he was sitting in front of me, and he didn't know who I was, I didn't know who he was. And Maharaj had this little thing he used to do, which I caught on, I had been there for a while, which is you'd walk in, and he would throw out like a fisherman, like a line, and you'd go like, and then he'd kind of like reel you in. You know? So you'd come in and he'd go kind of, so where you been? What's your spiritual practice? Okay. Well, I've traveled around, Southeast Asia, Thailand, and Burma, and so on, and I do Vipassana. Maharaj, oh, really? What's Vipassana? And you have Vipassana, rising, falling your breath, your witness, you're watching, and so on. He describes Vipassana meditation. He was sitting in front of me, and I had already been down this road. And so he's sitting in front of me, and Maharaj says, oh, that's not it. Now, it was from only my perception, I'm sitting just behind the person. It was like his body was made of glass and someone threw a rock through it. It was so painful that the translator leaned over and he said, don't feel bad. Whatever you're doing, Maharaj always says, that's not it. Okay? Because there's an I doing it. There's an I that wants to get something. Okay? So the context we're trying to do in post-deconstruction, just to help explain it, to make it less, in quotes, refutable, are one, we would talk about postmodernism, which we didn't get into and probably won't have time to get into, but certainly the neuroscience, okay, the I arises after the fact, the quantum physics, which is obviously form is emptiness, emptiness is form, same system. And then, of course, you have Buddhism, which we didn't get into. Another piece of Buddhism, which we'll get into kind of more in the second half, called Madhyamika Buddhism, which is probably as close to Advaita Vedanta as you're going to find. So, yes?
So, based on everything you've said, what this man says, what do you do every day?
I find out. In other words...
It's all nothing.
Right.
Then why are we bothering to do anything?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I could say that I find myself places. In other words, like, yes, I'm doing a talk right now, I guess. I'm getting dressed, I'm going to do a talk. When I used to do workshops, I was telling Isaac the other day, in Germany, I would walk in and I would go, oh, this must be a workshop going on. Must be. And I would I'd find myself, this thing, sitting down, and I'd go, I guess I'm leading the workshop. And then I would lean over to my translator and say, what workshop is this? And he would whisper back, quantum 3 or whatever he said, and I would kind of dial it up and do it. Because I was trying at that point to bring people from square one to nothing. I had a call once when I first was starting out. This guy called me. He was a real estate agent in Chicago. and he wanted to become an international real estate agent. And actually, I had lunch with him about 3-4 years ago. He actually still tells the story. So he called me up and he said, I'm in Chicago, and I just did a workshop with Tony Robbins, and I want to know that if I take your workshop and I'm a real estate agent, I want to become an international real estate agent. And Tony Robbins said I could. Will I get that from your workshop? And I said, no. He said, what will I get? I said, I don't know. He said, why should I take it? I said, I don't know if you should. He said, well, what will I get? And I said, nothing. And he said, but what will I become? Will I be able to become an agent? I said, I have no idea. He said, what will I get? I said, nothing. He said, why should I take it? I said, I didn't say you should. What will I get? Nothing, if you're lucky. So, another question that I can answer in this part? Yeah, Richard.
These two fluids, does consciousness create the fluids so it can reflect upon itself or experience itself or play with itself through neurotransmitters? Because it said fluids interact and the I am appears.
Right.
Does the I am exist as consciousness prior to fluids, coalesces as fluids, and then experiences itself as human thought, human consciousness?
Can you be a little vaguer? Okay, I'll take it in the second half, but let me say this much of it. The I am, there's no I separate from the fluids. Okay. The I is fluids coming together. There's no subjective experience of being. Now, the mythology is that the being or whatever this thing here wants to play with itself, and so it comes in different forms. It's a mythology. It's a story to organize chaos. Why did bad things happen? It must have been because something I did over here. There's a whole thing in this on cause and effect. Okay. And then Maharaj said very clearly there is no karma. And I have it listed, I have it several places in here where he actually says it. I mean, there's a piece of it where he actually says it. So the purpose of the nervous system is to organize chaos, and whether we think there's a God up there, that's why I put in freeze, and pray. Exactly. Freeze. Freeze, shock, like it kind of, like shock. Mm-hmm. So I'll leave you with this before we take about a half an hour break, which is, I saw a wonderful interview with George Carlin. You guys familiar with George Carlin? Okay. So George Carlin was being interviewed, and they would talk about politics and things like that. And so the interviewer, I believe at the time, was Dennis Miller, who's now become a Republican, which is strange. And Dennis said, well, tell me, George, why do you think people believe all these things? He's talking about politics. And Carlin said, well, people are stupid and easily manipulated. That was his first statement. And he goes, okay, George, I know that's kind of your line, but why? What's your theory? Why do people actually believe all of these things? And Carlin said, my theory is this. If you can get people to believe there's an invisible man who floats in the sky, who watches every single thing you do and keeps count of every single thing you do, and if you do these 10 good things, you're going to go to heaven and be in bliss for all of eternity, but if you don't, you can go to hell and rot in all of eternity, but he loves you. He said, if you get people to believe that, then they'll believe anything. He said that 4th of July shit just starts coming, right, like crazy. Land of the free, home of the brave. The army is here to keep your peace. The police are here to protect you. Your vote counts, etc., etc. So it's very big archetype. When I use the word archetype, is a type of types around this whole mythology about this person or being or something floating up there, or that I will somehow go there. Nirvana means extinction. And the Buddha said, no being has ever entered nirvana. How could it? If nirvana means extinction, and there is no being, how could you enter it? He said, you might not necessarily even be aware of your own enlightenment. How could you be? Because you're not. Maharaj used to say, you are the child of a barren woman. How do I live with what? I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
How do you live with that in your everyday life?
Everything just kind of happens. The question was, how do I live it in my everyday life?
How do you make decisions? You don't make decisions.
I notice what, I'll give you an example.
You don't have
Several years ago, I had taken Spanish in high school and college and so on. And so I live in California, so I go, I'll take Spanish. I'll review it. Well, should I take German? Well, I'll go down to the junior college, and it was like, the only thought that I had was, I'll find out which one I'm going to take when I get there, because I'll notice which classroom I'm sitting in. So there isn't the mentation of, should I take Spanish or should I take German? I go, oh, I'm in the Spanish class. I'm taking Spanish. I'll buy those books. Okay. So I find myself, the I comes later and justifies. You'll find yourself in situations, you go, why did I do that? You couldn't have done anything other than what you did. See, everything embedded in language is embedded in choice. When they say that one substance, not two, or form is emptiness, emptiness is form, how could a particle or a droplet in the ocean choose to go here rather than there if the whole ocean is going that direction? Something else. Yeah.
So how do you equate what you just said to people getting physical illnesses in their bodies with something, materializes like a cancer, form of cancer?
Yeah, I don't. No, I've met the most wonderful people who had cancer, and I think it's Gambino, the Gambino Mafia family lived to 90 in perfect health. Go figure, he was a smoker. Now, so what I'm trying to say is, I don't use it in terms of disease or health or any of that kind of stuff. There's no interpretation on my side at all on that. Some people get cancer and they go into remission. I had a friend of mine just over in the last month or so who had lung cancer. Everybody said he was going to die. He went into remission. My other friend had tongue cancer at 39, never smoked. He died at 39 or 40. So I don't make any correlation. Because this work, let me be also clear, which makes it again very different. It's not a healing thing. It really isn't. It's not about healing. It's about one thing and one thing only. That's finding out who you are. It's not about having a better life. If we get back into this, basically you are a mirage that does not know you're a mirage. Psychology and spirituality, for the most part, is trying to make a better mirage. If I do this, I'll become more loving, more forgiving, more sweet, more caring, more giving, more this, more that. I'll be less angry, and so on and so on and so on. But there's only one substance, not two. It's only a spiritual system or a psychological system that has a judgment, evaluation, and significance placed upon any particular experience. In other words, there's a sensation. The sensation is I then produce an I and go, there's a sensation, abstraction. Next abstraction, there's I witnessing the sensation. It's obviously anger. Abstraction, obviously it's bad, I should get rid of it. I'll do this therapy, I'll do this mantra, yantra, tantra. If you're going spiritual, if you're going psychological, I guess you could do anything from Reichian therapy to Erickson work to whatever you wanted to do. But someone to get rid of this, obviously this is bad. There's a judgment, evaluation, significance played upon every time there's an abstraction that occurs. Judgment, this is what it is and it's bad. Evaluation, this means something about me. And significance, anger is worse than love, and joy is better than this, and this is better than that. Yes?
At the top of your presentation, you said about 25 years ago that you were in great pain and began this search in this path, not with the intention of service for others, but you would do anything to get rid of the pain. So I ask you, in light of everything that you've said up to this point, how has it impacted your pain and what do you make of it?
Okay. The one thing, I was a psychologist, maybe people know that, so I had a practice for many years, and I trained therapists for years. I dropped out of even having any of that stuff about a dozen years ago. I was fortunate because I had one belief that I held on to from the time I remember having any ideas or thoughts. And actually in the book Quantum Consciousness, I put that in the first paragraph or two. I had this belief that the reason that I was suffering was because I didn't know who I was. And somehow, if I could get who I was, then the pain would go away. Okay? And so, through the, in quotes, neti, not this, not this, not this, not this, not this, not this. I'm not bad, I'm not good. I'm not this, I'm not this. Let me tell you, I hope we don't duplicate it. When I came to India, I met Muktananda in the early 70s, and I'd done the standard yoga of the early 70s and read the autobiography of a yogi and all the stuff people did at that time. When I met Muktananda, he said, oh, come to India. I'm making a very long story, very, very short. And so the pain was extremely overwhelming. The reason I was attracted to this, in quote, this process was because I had that belief that if I could find who I was, then the pain would go. By the way, there's a saying in India, the bigger the guru, the bigger the Maya. Okay. The bigger the Maya. The bigger the illusion. Okay. So I took on a spiritual system. There are pictures of me somewhere in here, which it shocks me. People don't recognize me. It's like 1979. And that's you? I don't believe that. But I'm kind of like, even there's a picture here, with part of the video of myself with Maharaj, and I'm very kind of back and kind of, or with my little bindu and, my little mala, kind of, doing my, all in white, doing that game. Now, I was trained through all this thing in the early 70s, and then Muktananda, that whatever the guru wants you to do, you do. And if you do it, then you get this enlightenment and bliss, and if you don't do it, then you get piss, and so on. Now, and I played that game not knowing it was a game. A very small part of me knew it was a game. Now, when I went to Maharaj, and again, it'll probably be on this DVD somewhere, he looked at me and he said, are you willing to stay 8 days and absorb the teachings? Now, for those who have been through the India game, I gave the perfect answer, which was, whatever Maharaj wants me to do, I'll do. He looked at me like I was a complete idiot. Don't you understand? I don't play that game. You want to play guru-disciple? You play it somewhere else. You want to stay, you don't want to stay, leave. Now, the pain was, again, as you grow up as a kid, you continually are picking up systems, parts of mom, parts of dad. You're picking up all of these systems. Your nervous system wants to survive. And the way to survive with our mom and dad is to laugh at the jokes and tell them how wonderful they are. Okay? And so you're fusing with all of this material. And then as you get older, you carry that on. So you get involved with a psychological or spiritual trip. You then fuse with the trip that's being presented. When Maharaj, so basically, discarding. I had to discard this, but more importantly, I had to discard, I had organized my whole life around this. And so the pain is also the discarding, but also, of course, there's discarding and there's more, in quote, space, and discarding and more space, and discarding and more space. And obviously, you can't let go of something until you know what it is. So his tendency was to almost reach in and go and show it to you. And you go, oh my God. It was like terrible, and you go, and you had to deal with it, whatever that was. He didn't particularly give you a way or a process to do that. Second, so the question was, why do you need to know yourself? The answer to that question is, I don't necessarily think you do, you don't. It'll either happen or it won't happen. The illusion is that I'm going to, by doing Vipassana, by doing a mantra, by doing a tantra, by doing whatever, will then realize this. But when you get into a circular pattern, is when you imagine that by doing this, will get this. It's basically spiritual capitalism. If I work, I get money, and with money I can buy things. If I do mantra, yantra, tantra long enough, then I get enough good stuff so I can kind of cash it in, and I can get my reward in heaven, nirvana, however it has created. Which came first, the fluid, the chicken or the egg? Okay. There's neither fluid or I. Because the fluids coming together, again, it's really the same question as the poor lady back there I call the evolution lady. Because what you have is, in order for someone to say there are fluids, it requires a perceiver, a subtler perceiver, a microscope, or whatever they might use to figure all that stuff out. But it still requires a perceiver. Okay? So there are no fluids. Fluids are a description of something that isn't. Okay. So all we're doing, all post-deconstruction's attempt to do was to find the most irrefutable metaphor, which was physics, which is daily use, neuroscience, and we didn't get into going in touch really postmodernism, but really actually there were 7 contexts, to use them to become with an irrefutable way of describing it, and then discarding it. All language is metaphor, because all language are descriptions. They're metaphoric representations of something that's not there. Okay? The I is a symbolic representation of nothing. And that's all.